Welcome to the Engaged by Design podcast, where we drive innovation and help you as a leader engage more learners more effectively. I'm Dr. Vernon Smith, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Michael Cottom.
Hey, Vernon, it's great to be back with you as we finish up part 3 of our conversation with Jenny Douglas, and I'm really looking forward to the way we wrap this one up. It's going to be great. So are there some things that tend to hold us back? Maybe common things you've encountered as you're working with individuals and with groups. What holds us back?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we are all to some extent products of our upbringing, of the families that we've been born into, even generationally. Looking back, it's interesting. It's fascinating research on the, impacts of generational trauma, even, generations forward and backward from that time, and how much we can even impact ourselves by working through some of those things. So what I have found is that all of us, because of kind of the milieu in which we've grown up, the culture, the expectations, tend to have these kind of programs running in the background that have formed us, from a usually pretty early age. And they're almost like, I guess I'll go back to kind of the software analogy. They're almost like software that's been installed that we maybe are not even really aware that that's what's pushing, that's what's driving us in the background, but it's a structure and a framework that influences who we believe ourselves to be, what we believe ourselves to be capable of doing, how we present ourselves to the world. And there's sort of like two opposite beliefs that a lot of people have, probably without really realizing that they're under the surface. And I find them very common in a lot of people who end up in leadership positions. One of those beliefs is, ironically enough, the belief that I'm not enough. I think a lot of overachievers or high achievers have come with this idea that I have to keep proving to myself and to other people. I have to keep overgiving. Sometimes the manifestation of this is I will overgive, I will overextend, I will say yes to every opportunity, even when it doesn't suit me the best. I will always be the one that everyone else can count on without necessarily expressing what I need or, how other people can help me. So we end up with this kind of paradoxical, really super high achieving people on the outside, have done everything, have all the degrees, they have all the achievements, all the certifications, but they still sometimes really feel like I'm still not good enough, or I still have to prove it, or I can't really ask other people for what I need. I'm lonely because I have to appear that I always have it all together.
So you're saying we're half-baked?
Yeah, we're half-baked.
Jenny, you hit on something really important, I think, and that is as you go up the organization, that sense of loneliness increases. Do you have any thoughts around that and how to, think about or a skill set to deal with it?
That's a really fascinating question, because definitely leadership can be a very lonely space when you feel like you can't necessarily be personally vulnerable with other people who may report to you or in the organization, because there are dynamics around, well, is that person, really strong enough to be in that position? Do they have the capacity to make tough decisions? Maybe it's a false perception at times, right? But to me, so one of the things that I have learned to do better, that I try to help other people to do, is be more grounded in myself. And by that, I mean, really physically and emotionally do what I need to do to feel like I have my center in place. So when I walk into a meeting or an interaction, I am less likely to be swayed or to feel uneasy about that. So there's some self-work to feel like I know who I am, and not just on an intellectual level, but I have my own sources of power to draw from. That can be your spiritual beliefs, that can be your sense of, family and tribe and culture. There's a lot of contributing factors to that. But then I think there also needs to be a support group, right? That might not be your immediate team or, people who are in your immediate work environment that you can go to and say, this just sucked. I had a bad day. This went wrong, or I feel like I didn't handle this situation right. And they'll listen to you kind of non-judgmentally. So, that can be your peers, that can be your friends, whoever it is that you can find that you think is in that role, who really doesn't even have to say anything, right? It's not even about giving advice. It's just about listening to that, so that the isolation of that leadership decision making or that environment isn't, so overwhelming.
Two things come to mind. The first one is that a coach can help with that. And one of the things I learned very early on in my career was that as I looked at leaders that were progressing and doing good work and being effective leaders, I found this underlying pattern that they had executive coaches, that they were using a coach on a regular basis. And it was one of those catalysts to help them move forward. But you also mentioned something very important. You can't be completely vulnerable in your team sometimes when you're a leader, because that doesn't work. But going to your peers, to have a peer group, for me, when I've had those, I reach out to colleagues that are in the similar situation and have a regular time to catch up, talk about things, and just vent if you need to, but also to do exactly what you're talking about. Hey, I handled this situation this way. Do you have any insights or things? Real colleagues are fantastic for that. And sometimes I think in the churn and the ball, many irons in the fire and all the balls in the air and the many hats that we're wearing, sometimes we, if we haven't purposely thought about what you're talking about and reach out and create your tribe, your community, sometimes these days you actually have to go out and create that tribe. You have to create that community because it'll help when these other things go crazy, which they do in leadership.
And I wonder, just as you were starting to talk about this, Jenny, that we maybe have a mischaracterization or a misunderstanding of what a leader is or what a leader does, that we tend to think of it as a solo enterprise. There is one leader, right? But everything you're talking about and that Vernon's mentioning is not so. You become lonely because you make yourself lonely instead of finding your tribe, finding your people around you that can support you. And I think maybe it's fundamentally a misunderstanding of what a leader is and what a leader does.
I think that could very well be because, maybe we're used to this idea of sort of purely hierarchical leadership or the sense that, well, somebody who's out in front, they're the ones leading the charge. Whereas I think there is a much greater need probably for this sense of mutual responsibility and kind of communal leadership in a way.
I suspect it's a little bit of both, but I think maybe especially earlier in my journey in my career, thinking of the leader as the one, and then they have to be the strong one. I think it's pretty rare that a single person can do all of the things. You need people on either side lifting you up, holding up your arms, helping you to be strong enough to do whatever it is that needs to be done. That it isn't really a solo thing. It is always, you always have support unless you cut yourself off from it. And I think that's sometimes where we get stuck in the I'm not enough, or it's all on me and all the weight is on my shoulders. And if I don't do it, I'm a bad leader. I don't know. This self-talk, maybe I'm talking to myself. I don't know what's just happened there.
No, but the idea is that, we shift down from that, neocortex, the mammalian brain down into that reptilian brain. And when you're down in that reptilian brain, it doesn't allow you to actually think about these other sources of support and other things like that. Fight, flight, freeze. You're in
Yeah.
that. To see that, it's interesting to hear your take on it, Jenny. And also, have you had any experience with clients that you've had that you've been able to help them sort of reconnect and self examine so that it turned out better?
Yeah, I mean, working with individuals who are very productive in their careers. Someone comes to mind who is very successful in her job and what she was doing, but really kind of constantly felt, I don't know if the right word is overwhelmed, but sort of like behind the eight ball, like she could never get ahead. And, we just really
Mm-hmm.
had to work on what was going on behind the scenes that had informed that viewpoint. And then what happens is we end up with these sort of programs running in the background, but then unconsciously we reinforce them in the choices that we make, maybe by not seeking out that community of people, so we feel lonelier, or by putting our own ideas down or not putting them forward. So in working with a client like that, it's really kind of going into pattern recognition is a lot of it, and saying, okay, when you notice this pattern happening of like, I didn't speak up in this meeting when I wanted to, let's talk about when that has happened in the past and what you're feeling like while it's happening, so that we can get past maybe that internal monologue that's saying, no, my idea is not any good, other people have better ideas than I do, or I'm not ready to share that idea yet, and come up with some better ways to be able to bring ideas forward, as an example, by recognizing, the pattern that's taking place, and what are some other ways of approaching that type of situation to disrupt that pattern so that it doesn't have to continue, holding somebody back from what they want to do.
Thank you for that. I think that's great. And it also, I think, hopefully gives our listeners an idea of how you work with them if you're doing coaching or helping them with that. Jenny, I want to go back to the notion of the humanities and humanness that we have and have a need of. I know someone, and maybe I can get them to speak up, that went through a very dehumanizing experience when they were looking at a possible position, and the whole experience of talking about the job, about doing the job, was not with live humans at all. It was just different. And I don't know if Michael, you want to...
You didn't tell me you were going to ask me about this situation.
But I want to talk about this as we go and talk about the humanity in the age of AI.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk about, and then
Yeah.
Jenny, we could have you talk more about why the human-centered leadership in AI is more critical than ever.
Yeah, I'll give this as an example. I won't be overly specific, but I've noticed as it's been happening for many years, but maybe accelerated more because of the ability of AI technologies to evaluate or guide your decisions or parsing of data, or so many things that could happen. There was a while ago, there was a position that I had applied for that I was totally qualified for, I would really like to do. And part of the process I did describe as dehumanizing, because it was an email that said, okay, now record your responses to this, each of these questions, and you have 30 seconds, or you have a minute and 30 seconds, or 2 minutes, or whatever, and not even knowing what was coming, being able to put together something coherent, some answer that's coherent. Like this answer is not very coherent to what Vernon said.
No, I think it's a good story.
Putting that together in the moment and then having no chance to revise it when you didn't know what the questions were. And many of the questions actually had nothing to do with the job or the responsibilities. I went in thinking, great, I'll talk about how I did this and how I did that. And I have examples. I have stories top of my head for so many things that were in that position. But going through that experience that was very automated and inhuman, actually gave me a sour feel that even if they had followed up, I don't think I would have taken the job because of being treated in such a way that seemed less than human and really working towards an executive type of position and being evaluated by seemed like a machine. Didn't know. It just felt dehumanizing. Whether it was effective or not for them, I don't know. But being on the one side of it, I thought, it's a great way to be efficient about evaluating people and narrowing your pool of candidates. But what is the impact of that? And I think sometimes as we implement technologies, we don't think about the effects of what we do, what we decide to use, how we design our products or our systems or our processes, and the impact that it has on our own teams or our own employees or the people we're interacting with. I'm going to toss another one out there. You got me going, Vernon. So another one is, what has happened with many companies who very early on laid off their customer support staff in favor of a bot? And then they found out that people who were the call length decreased. They got more efficient and they lost their customers because there wasn't really a human connection. It's just a mistake of optimizing, I think, the wrong things, because these technologies are fantastic at helping us to be efficient and effective in what we do. But if they dehumanize, whether it's our own teams or the people, the customers, the people we're allegedly trying to serve, we don't have a business anymore. It's just gone. So there we go. We'll see how much of that I edit out, but that was, you got me going a little bit long there, Vernon.
Yeah, Michael has the power of editing for things. Jenny, thinking about this, here's an example, but what are the things that you see of the human-centered leadership in the age of AI that we're in? What are some of the factors that you think are critical?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, as I've been absorbing, the way that higher ed is trying to grapple with AI, but also, this is society at large. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is that, AI is a wonderful tool, but ultimately it doesn't have discernment or beneficence. When you think about a human-centered values, beneficence, fairness, justice.
It may not even have malevolence, if I can.
It may not even have
however
malevolence.
I say that word.
Right. Either beneficence or malevolence. It just doesn't have either of those. It mimics things. It brings back information. It replicates patterns. It even does some tasks, but it doesn't have that sense of discernment or decision-making that I believe we still really need to lead from a human-centered place. So there's a great example that I heard the other day. I think a positive example of using an AI tool in a research study where the researchers had discovered what they thought was maybe a novel connection. This is like medical research, right? But how could they investigate whether this was really a novel connection or not? So they used an AI tool to comb through, voluminous medical literature, looking for studies that had any data around this certain thing. Even if the studies were kind of on a different topic, they could pinpoint, they were looking at the thymus gland, which I know is kind of random, but they wanted studies that had any data around this thymus gland. And the tool was able to help them bring back literature they wouldn't have found or wouldn't have found easily. But they asked the questions, right? They asked the question. They then could interpret that literature and look at the data and draw the story out, because it's all about like, okay, there's all this data out there from these different studies. What does it mean together? I think that the human meaning making is still really central to that process. Sure, it can bring us back lots of responses, but what do we do with them and how do we contextualize them? What are the assumptions we're making with that data? How do we make meaning out of it? And then what do we do about it, right? So, okay, we have this finding that might be really interesting. What is the next step? And that's, I think, where humans have to take the lead. Maybe then the AI is a tool to say, okay, well, help me think about what my next experimental design might be to look at these questions, like show me some experimental designs around XYZ. But, making the decision and the discernment ourselves. I think we see the dangers like Michael was talking about with customer service, but even in things, there's been very recent stories about healthcare and like AI taking over diagnostic purposes and things like that. Okay, maybe there's some utility there to do some triage and kind of figure out, what do these keywords point towards. But we know that AI still has this great potential to replicate systemic bias and, based on the data set that it's drawing from. And there's certainly dangers there when it comes to recommending things like treatments and even who should receive treatments, like used by the insurance industry based on systemic inequities that are then being perpetuated because that's the data set that the algorithm is drawing from. So we can't rely on those tools to make that kind of decision for us. And that's where I think the ongoing, give and take and back and forth and it's going to be.
You want human in the loop. You want, we'd like to say faculty in the loop. You keep the faculty in the loop, but you keep the subject matter expert in the loop because that is actually more important because you don't know if there's going to be, we just recently learned about how they were using prompts to say, don't talk about goblins or other things in AI, right? So, medical practice, we've been using leeches for a long time. Leeches are very effective. And over the overall, we've been using that for a long time. That sounds like a really effective treatment. Why would you want to use modern antibiotics or something else to treat it? That is still built into the system and it needs that human view and human connection with it. But I agree with you also that it has to be an extender. You have to be able to, with recent diagnosticians in medicine, they were showing that if they used AI a lot, this was a recent study, showed that their abilities, they started relying on it more, their ability to recognize things actually decreased a little bit. So when you're relying upon that, it's like a muscle, right? You're not exercising that muscle, and so your skill set is there. So we still need folks to have all that information and be able to make sense and synthesize it. But we can do some tools to extend it, but let's keep that higher level humanity in it. I hope that emphasizes what you're trying to say, Jenny.
It does. And I think it comes back to this idea that those high level skills are relational. Whether we're talking about education or the healthcare environment, we want there to be a relationship of some kind where people are engaging with each other to kind of push their ideas forward, to get more information, to interrogate their own assumptions, to ask what are the ramifications of taking this course of action versus this course of action. And I think we need to continue to emphasize those relationships even as we use the tools we have to maybe get better information coming in the background or different ways of conglomerating information so that we can kind of see relationships between data points differently, right? And maybe come up with a bigger picture than we had before, but then, have that human in the loop part to decide, okay, well, what's the best use of that?
I found recently as I'm working with chat, and I use ChatGPT every day, I'm using it all the time, is to ask it to argue the other side of something. we get very fast responses in all of our search engines now with AI synthesizing everything and putting it at the top of the list where you never actually go out to a website. You just got your synthesis of the websites on the with AI. But asking it to argue another point or another option or give you 3 ways you could do whatever it is that you're asking about, it seems to be it can facilitate critical thinking instead of taking it away, but that's only if you use the right practices.
Hmm.
We used to talk about digital literacy. I think it's more at this point, it's AI literacy, being able to work with that technology to get better rather than letting it take over your learning or your decision making.
And I think that goes back to Jenny's notion that we were talking about earlier about that self-reflection.
Yeah.
Using it and making it purposeful. Yeah, you might not have, you can use an AI to ask you those questions. Say, give me the counter. Tell me why I'm
Yeah.
wrong. And don't take it as law, right? As you get it, well, the chat told me this, or whatever. But Jenny, is that accurate? The way I'm portraying that?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it comes back to those meta thinking skills, and not meta like the company Meta that's taken over our lives, but
Yes, causing
meta
damage
like
for
that
people.
self-reflexive
Thinking about thinking.
thinking about
right?
thinking. And I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of our educational responsibility at this stage of the game, when it's so easy to just go get an answer to
Yeah.
help ourselves and our students use those tools to think about their own thinking. And we need to bring our best researcher mindsets to that, how we were trained to exactly ask for the counter argument. What's the counter argument? Can you bring me evidence that is against this viewpoint? Whoa.
Yeah.
Use it more as that sparring partner, and bring our best
Yeah. And one of the
researcher head.
One of the things I love about that is that ChatGPT doesn't, or whichever one you're using, but it's the one I use most often, it doesn't get its feelings hurt when I disagree with it, right? So there's some benefit of being able to actually think about stuff, think through things objectively, with still might be some bias in there, but still with some objectivity, because it doesn't matter how many times I ask the question or how many different ways I ask the question. It's not going to get impatient, and it's not going to get mad at me, and because it doesn't have those abilities.
Right. Being a very patient tutor. Sort of like a tutor, you can explain it to me again, explain it to me again, explain it to me differently. Give me another example of this. I mean, that can be a fantastic use to just try to learn something new and not have a person who's like, I told you that 10 times.
Yeah.
Get it through your thick
That's called parenting.
Right.
So if we shift this a little bit to the leadership realm, because we're all working in a world that is kind of surrounded with AI, large language models, generative AI, agentic AI, all of these things happening so quickly. What are some of the skills that or qualities that a leader needs to be able to be effective as a leader in this kind of an environment? What have you seen?
I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the strategy of saying, okay, look, these tools are available to us. And when we start to look at like enterprise-wide systems, and a lot of times they now all have kind of their own like AI layer that could be brought in. Just because the tools are there doesn't mean we should use all of them, or that we should use them all separately, or that we should use them indiscriminately. I think the role of leadership is to say, okay, what is the purpose behind wanting to implement whatever tool it is? What problem might it help to solve, or what information might it give us that we really can't get another way, or is impractical for us to get another way? And then how do we kind of build the structures around it and the safeguards around it so that we're not indiscriminately, sort of reinforcing bias or something like that, or putting in information that's private and using that in a way that's kind of inappropriate to the context. So I think it's really about steering in sort of a broad way, steering the course and really kind of working broadly across systems, again, like we talked about earlier, because, even in a higher ed context, we know institutional definitions may even vary within the institution. So, and AI may bring you back super factual answers that mean nothing if they're based on, varying definitions, or it's pulling from different fields. I mean, the more I have kind of learned about it, the more it seems essential to really have a strong foundation of like, how do we want to use our institutional knowledge and data, and then how can our people interpret it the best? I mean, we have like gobs of data, but what do we want to be able to do with it? So it feels like just a really kind of herding cats might be a little too broad, but really a steering function, because it's going to keep changing. I mean, it's evolving so fast. It's like
every week there's something
hard and fast policy or structure that's going to be long lasting. It's really, maybe that's like the tubing up the river. We need to like go with the flow a little bit and then steer when we need to.
Tubing up the river. You just took me to the Salt River in Arizona, getting crispy and then trying to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, which is absolutely fun. Yeah, we, this is one of those VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous in times. We maybe need to go with the flow, but steer in that time. Jenny, here at the Engaged by Design podcast, we like to have our guests answer a question from their perspective, and it's always something we think is helpful, and we've never had the same real response. But, we like to ask, how do you, Dr. Jennifer Douglas, engage more learners more effectively?
What keeps coming to mind based on our conversation and what I've been thinking lately is this idea of telling your story, whether that's your personal story or your professional story or the story of your research. It's all about creating a context that is embedded and personal, but brings forward new ideas. So when I'm working with students, I think they need to feel like somebody is actually listening to them on the other side that cares about what they bring to the table. So integrating their personal and professional story into what they're doing, into what they're learning, is super important. It also humanizes this entire endeavor so that we don't feel like we're learning for the sake of learning, but we're learning in order to change our own story, in order to, change something that's around us that we want to be better.
I love that. Jenny, we're going to have to maybe do this again, because this has been fun. It's been a great conversation. And, folks, we'll put Jenny's contact info in our show notes, and so you can get a hold of her. But Jenny, we really want to thank you for your willingness to come on and share some of your personal insights, your personal story, as well as the insights you have on leadership that I think are really good. This might be one of those podcasts people might want to listen to twice, because I think there's some really great insights in there.
So, Jenny, is there a place where you prefer people to contact you to work with you as a coach? We will put it in the show notes, but if you want to say it out loud and talk a little bit about it, we'll put that up here.
The best place right now is through my email, and that's Jennifer@beinghumanenergy.com.
So beinghumanenergy.com is it? Very good.
Thank you both so much for having me. I've enjoyed it so much. Such a privilege.
It's been great.
To meet you.
It's great. Yeah.
Oh, it's so great to catch up and so great to hear your stories. It's awesome.
So good. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Engaged by Design podcast. If you want to shape future episodes, send us the questions you're wrestling with right now. We may feature it in an upcoming conversation. In the meantime, please follow, rate, and share the show. We appreciate you being here, and stay engaged by design.